They wore crowns, commanded armies, and ruled empires. But behind the thrones and royal portraits were minds consumed by madness, obsession, and secrets history desperately tried to bury. These weren't just eccentric rulers. They were walking scandals in silk robes. One believed he was made of glass and refused to be touched. Another kept his enemies' heads as dinner guests. From kings who talked to corpses to those who held weddings for animals. This isn't the history they teach in school, because it's too bizarre, too disturbing, and way too real. Some ruled with cruelty, others with delusion, but all 11 of these kings had one thing in common. They left behind legacies soaked in insanity. You'll never look at royalty the same way again. This is the twisted side of power, where the crown weighs heavy, and madness is part of the throne. Let's uncover the secrets they hoped we'd never find. Imagine living in a palace where every step feels like walking on eggshells, because the king believes he's made entirely of glass. Not metaphorically, literally. He thought one wrong move, one accidental bump, and he'd shatter into 1,000 glittering pieces. He refused to let people touch him. He wore special clothes reinforced with iron rods to protect his body. Guards were ordered to move slowly around him. Servants whispered in his presence, terrified of being the one who might crack the crown. And yet, this man ruled a kingdom. Foreign diplomats had to pretend everything was normal while watching a monarch frozen in fear of himself. The irony, his madness came in waves. One moment, he'd speak with regal clarity. The next, he'd forget who he was, flee his own chambers, or collapse in screaming fits. His people didn't call it mental illness. They called it possession, divine punishment, or worse. Physicians tried bleeding, burning herbs, prayers, but nothing pierced his delusion. The court couldn't replace him. You don't just depose a king for thinking he's glass when he's still wearing the crown. So instead, the entire royal household learned to adapt. Reality had to bend around him. Now imagine ruling millions while being terrified of a chair leg, a door frame, or your own reflection. That wasn't just eccentricity. That was royal fragility turned deadly. And if you think that's as insane as it gets, just wait. We're only getting started. Power doesn't just corrupt. It warps reality. And in one emperor's case, it twisted grief into something grotesque. After the death of his wife, he didn't just mourn. He searched for her in the face of a young boy. When he found a teenage servant who resembled her, everything unraveled. He had the boy forcibly castrated, dressed him in royal gowns, painted his face, called him by his dead wife's name, then married him, publicly. To the Roman people, it was horror wrapped in ceremony. Parades were held, coins were minted. The boy, now empress, was seen standing at his side, silent, vacant, lost. But no one could speak against it, because this wasn't a man acting out of love. This was control, madness, and obsession wearing the mask of grief. And the boy, history remembers his name but not his voice. He had no say. Just a stolen identity, a stolen future, and a place in the imperial nightmare. It wasn't just a relationship. It was a ritual, a way for the emperor to resurrect the dead in the most disturbing way imaginable. This wasn't love, it was delusion, sculpted into law by the hands of absolute power. It's easy to think ancient Rome was full of decadence and drama. But stories like this remind us sometimes the most terrifying thing isn't bloodshed or war. It's a leader who can rewrite reality and force everyone else to live inside his madness. And we've still got 9 more kings to go. Grief makes people do strange things, but this king took it to a level that still makes historians shiver. He'd fallen deeply in love with a woman his court despised. She wasn't royalty, she wasn't chosen, but to him she was everything. They had children together. They lived in secret. And when the court finally had enough, they had her executed right in front of his eyes. But he didn't break. He waited. Then, when he finally took the throne, he did something no one expected. He dug up her corpse. Literally, had her body exhumed, dressed in royal robes, seated on a throne beside him, and crowned her queen. The decaying remains of the woman he loved were forced into a grotesque ceremony of power and revenge. Nobles were made to kneel before her, kiss her hand, swear loyalty to a corpse, and if you refused, you were next. This wasn't just about mourning, it was domination, a final act to show the world that no one, not even death, could keep them apart. Or worse, that he still held the power to make everyone around him play along with his fantasy, no matter how horrific. It wasn't a love story. It was a royal horror show played out in candlelight and silence, while a kingdom looked on in stunned obedience. And if that sounds unsettling good, because when kings go mad, their grief doesn't just stay private. It drags everyone into the grave with them. Jealousy is dangerous, but when it belongs to a sultan with absolute power, it becomes catastrophic. One rumor, that's all it took. A whisper that a woman from his harem had been unfaithful. No proof, no names, just suspicion. And in a single order, he unleashed one of the most horrifying acts of royal paranoia the world has ever seen. He had every woman in his harem, hundreds of them, tied up in weighted sacks. Then, one by one, they were thrown into the Bosphorus. Drowned, silenced, erased, not because they were guilty, but because he was afraid. Because in his twisted view, it was better to lose them all than to risk betrayal from one. The empire didn't dare question it. Courtiers looked the other way. The palace grew quieter, colder. The fountains kept running. The silk curtains still danced in the breeze. But inside those walls, the echoes of fear never stopped. And that's the thing about unchecked power. When someone that unstable sits on the throne, logic dies first. Then mercy, then human life, all sacrificed to feed a ruler's growing shadow of doubt. They say the river ran red that day, but history barely whispers it now because no one wants to remember that one man's fear killed hundreds of innocent women in a single breath. And if you think that's the worst it gets, don't blink, because royal madness doesn't slow down, it only deepens. Not all madness screams in blood and fire. Some of it whispers from marble corridors and golden bathrooms. This king didn't rule through violence or terror. He ruled through fantasy, obsessed with beauty, obsessed with privacy, obsessed with himself. His castles looked like fairy tales come to life. Spiraling towers, mirrored halls, rooms built just for dreams. But underneath it all was a man unraveling. He spent days alone, speaking to portraits, writing operas no one heard, riding through the woods at night in full costume. He hated public appearances, refused to engage in politics, and then there were the rumors: lavish golden toilets, velvet, covered bathroom walls, entire rooms built just to admire his own reflection. Some say he demanded staff leave before he entered a room. Others whisper that he had his feces inspected as part of daily ritual. Was it hypochondria, narcissism, or just the slow drip of royal isolation poisoning a man's mind? Eventually, his ministers had enough. They declared him insane, stripped him of power, locked him away. Days later, he was found dead under mysterious circumstances, floating in a lake beside his psychiatrist. No witnesses, no answers, just silence. He wasn't a tyrant. He didn't command armies, but his mind had become its own prison. A gilded, glittering nightmare of loneliness and delusion. And sometimes, that's even more terrifying because not all mad kings scream. Some just disappear into their own reflections and never come back. Imagine having so much power that you could delete the gods themselves. That's exactly what one pharaoh did. He didn't just rewrite the rules of religion. He set the entire spiritual system of ancient Egypt on fire. He banished the old gods, shut down temples, and demanded that everyone worship one single deity, the sun disk, Aten. No more Ra, no more Osiris, just the sun and him. He didn't stop there. He changed his name, moved the capital, and reshaped Egypt in his image. Statues were destroyed, inscriptions chiseled out. It wasn't reform, it was erasure. He wanted to start history over, with himself as the divine center. But the people weren't ready to let go of their gods, and the priests, furious. His kingdom didn't just break, it fractured. As his grip slipped, the paranoia grew. He began removing his own image from monuments, chiseled out his name, almost like he knew what was coming, and after he died, the backlash was immediate. His memory was obliterated. Temples smashed, scrolls burned, successors refused to speak his name. It's why historians used to call him the heretic king, because even death wasn't enough to forgive his audacity. He tried to play God, tried to reshape a civilization with his mind alone. And in doing so, he didn't just lose his crown, he almost vanished from history entirely. And when a king tries to erase the world and ends up erasing himself, that's the kind of madness even time struggles to understand. And that is the terrifying truth. These weren't just rulers, they were living myths wrapped in velvet and crowned in delusion. Each one believed they were untouchable, divine, unbreakable, but power doesn't make you immortal. It just hides the cracks. Until history decides to peel back the gold and show us what was really underneath. We remember their crowns, their wars, their monuments, but we forget the madness that fueled them. The drowned, the disfigured, the silenced, 11 kings, 11 empires, and a trail of insanity that history tried its best to bury. But not anymore, because these weren't just stories of the past. They're warnings for the future.